by you, the people.
Live from our nation's capital, it's Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Hi, I'm Brad Bannon. I'm the host of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm a national Democratic and progressive strategist, a columnist for The Hill in Washington, D.C., and a political analyst for News Radio KNX in Los Angeles. Mondays on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward and keeping it from going backwards during the Trump administration. Mondays on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players. This week, my guests we have two guests from specific policy areas. And I think in the next few shows, we're going to bring on policy experts from different areas to talk about the threats that the Trump administration threatened to different people in different parts of the country. We have two great guests today. In the first half hour, our guest is CNN national security analyst, Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired. And in the second half hour, we're going to talk to Hope Fry, who is the co-executive director of an immigrant group, a support group called Project Lifeline. And in both cases, we're going to talk about yesterday's inaugural, if you can stand to watch us talk about it, and to see how it impacts their policy areas. But before we get to our guests, we're going to play this clip from President Trump's inaugural yesterday, where he talks about retaking the Panama Canal.
Before and lost 38,000 lives in the building of the Panama.
Our guest in this half hour is Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired. And he is also, you've probably seen on CNN as one of their prominent military and national security analysts. Welcome back to Deadline DC, Colonel. How are you doing today?
Hey, Brad. Good to be back with you. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Oh, just fine. Just hanging in there like everybody else. It's going to be a long 4 years. Let's start with the Panama Canal. The new president talked about taking it back. And what was your take on this, and what reasonable expectation does the United States have of taking the Panama Canal back after we gave it to Panama?
Yeah, well, since 1999, the Panamanians have been running the canal, and it is, as an outgrowth of the agreements that President Carter reached with then President Torrijos of, well, actually, he wasn't the president, but the strongman of Panama, Torrijos. The basic idea of retaking the Panama Canal after all these years is, to say the least, a surprising move on Trump's part. Of course, he broadcast the idea during the campaign, so when he first talked about it, people would look at this and say, okay, are his concerns valid? And the main concerns that Trump has seem to be centered on the idea of Chinese control of the canal. So the facts of the matter are basically the Chinese, number one, do not control the canal. There is a Hong Kong-based port company that runs two ports on the in Panama that are related to the canal, but the Chinese government does not control any aspect of the canal, nor do they control its finances or its operation in any way. Now, there are other Chinese efforts throughout Latin America that are evidence of much more Chinese control. There's a new port going up in Peru that is being built solely with Chinese labor. And that is something that is perhaps more of a threat to our presence in Latin America than any current Chinese activities along the Panama Canal. The other thing that Trump talked about was that we were paying excessive fees more than any other country for the transit of our ships in not just merchant vessels, but also naval vessels. And the fact of the matter is that Panama charges the same price for every vessel that transits the canal. The U.S. is no exception, and by treaty, they can't charge variable prices for one vessel versus another based on the country of origin. So there is no valid military or geostrategic or even economic reason for the United States to take over the canal, given the current situation.
So what's the point of all this? If, we are access to the Panama Canal isn't threatened. What is this all about? Is this just, America's back? We're going to do anything we want. You said to me that it reminded you of Manifest Destiny at the end of the 19th century. What is the point of all this swagger and taking over Greenland and God knows what is Trump trying to do here?
Well, what it looks like, Brad, is that he's kind of channeling his inner McKinley. So he's looking at what President William McKinley was doing at the latter part of the 19th, early part of the 20th century. Now, people look at McKinley as being a protectionist and being, someone who, basically had trade barriers and built up America, and, oh, by the way, prosecuted the Spanish-American War, so that we ended up taking over temporarily Cuba, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and yes, we started the process of building the Panama Canal through acquisitions and efforts that McKinley made. However, McKinley was actually quite a different guy. He actually saw the value of free trade if it could be fair trade. He also did not want to engage in the Spanish-American War, but was basically forced into it by the news outlets at the time, the William Randolph Hearst type news outlets in particular. And so what he's basically doing is President Trump is looking at history through kind of an interesting lens where he sees the idea of territorial acquisition as being his path to greatness, and that is what he's trying to achieve. And he's doing it on using the basis of a president who was a reluctant acquirer of territories, even though he obviously did acquire them as a result of the Spanish-American War.
Okay, well, let me, now we've talked about his inaugural address in Panama, let me ask you some questions about specific policy areas. Well, let's start with this. Let's talk about confirmations. Yesterday or this morning, the Senate Services Committee approved the nomination of Pete Hegseth as the head of the Pentagon as Defense Secretary. What did you make when you watched his testimony last week?
It was very clear that Pete Hegseth is not up to the task. He is, yes, he's glib, and kind of has a TV presenter's style, but the substance is lacking. He has never run anything larger than a small charity, which was not successful. He has a lot of personal problems. So from a model leadership perspective, he's definitely not suited to be an inspiration to the people that he leads. When you count civilians, the reserves, National Guard and active duty, about 3 million people that he would be in charge of. And he has no experience with that or with the budgetary process or the acquisition process. So any type of reform that would be, part of the Pentagon's efforts, or that should be something that a defense secretary would look at, is something that he will see from a very limited lens. He is, at least academically smart, based on his pedigree at both Princeton and Harvard, but his military experience is definitely not of the same caliber that you would need to run a large entity like the Pentagon. He's never served once in the Pentagon as a staff officer, and his wartime experience is actually somewhat limited as well. So there are plenty of other people, even on the conservative
Colonel Layton, I'm going to have to interrupt you because we've got to take a quick break for our radio listeners. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and CNN military national security analyst Cedric Layton.
If you came across someone struggling with hunger, how would you recommend?
Mark, you want to play the clip? You want to play it now or when we come out of the break? Okay, you're going to play it now? Okay. Okay. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is CNN military national security analyst Cedric Layton, Colonel, U.S. Air Force retired. Let me ask you about a couple of policy areas now, Colonel Layton. First, let's talk about the Ukraine. The president has made noises in the past about stepping away from the support that Ukraine is getting from the United States. But also yesterday, I guess he said that Putin is making a grave mistake, not coming to an agreement. What can we expect from Trump vis-a-vis the war in Ukraine?
I think this is going to be a very interesting test for Trump, actually, during his administration, at least during the first part of it, Brad. One of the things that is noteworthy is that his envoy, retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg, has basically admitted that the Trump assertion that he can solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours is false. In essence, it's not going to work. The things are too intricate. The issues are too intricate for them to be solved that quickly. So the big danger is going to be that Trump, in an effort to get a deal, is going to sell the Ukrainians short. And that is something that everybody is going to have to watch who has any interest whatsoever in Ukraine. Ukraine is strategically important, and perhaps Trump is beginning to recognize that. But his idea of going in and trying to curtail aid and offering things up to the Russians, such as saying that NATO membership, for example, is not in the cards for Ukraine, that's a big mistake. That's not something that a good negotiator would do before they go into negotiations. So hopefully what they'll do is they'll get Putin to the table, but they should make sure that any type of negotiations and any type of agreement is done with the concurrence and the participation of the Ukrainians, and specifically President Zelensky.
Now, realistically, if there's any the war can continue at great loss to both sides, or I assume the alternative is for Ukraine to give up the Crimea for instance. Actually, we're going to bring back our radio listeners now. We will return to this interview with CNN military analyst Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, when we get back from this break. And we'll talk more about national security policy, military policy, the Ukraine, the Middle East, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Okay, are you going to play that clip now? Okay. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Cedric Leighton, the military and national security analyst for CNN. We're going to start by playing this clip from the Trump inaugural yesterday when he talked about taking back the Panama Canal. And by the way, for our radio listeners, if you'd like to watch the show as well as listen to it, you can watch Deadline DC at twitter.com/Brad Bannon, at facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, and at youtube.com Deadline DC. Now our clip from the inaugural yesterday.
Before and lost 38,000 lives in the building of the Panama Canal. We have been treated very badly from this foolish gift that should have never been made, and Panama's promise to us has been broken. The purpose of our deal and the spirit of our treaty has been totally violated. American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
That is the president from yesterday's inaugural. Pretty scary speech. Now, if my history is correct, we talked about the fact that China doesn't dominate the Panama Canal. We talked about the idea that there's no threat to American access to the canal. And if my memory serves me, he talked about the 30,000 people who died. I think a lot of those weren't Americans. They were residents of the Caribbean who were dragged in to build the canal. But anyway, I know we're not an era of truth, so don't get me started on that. Our guest is Colonel Cedric Leighton, who is CNN's military and national security analyst. Colonel Leighton, we were talking about the Ukraine, and realistically, if there is any kind of agreement, what is Ukraine going to have to give up?
I think the main thing, Brad, is as far as Ukraine is concerned, is territory. The Russians control about 18% of Ukraine's internationally recognized landmass. In other words, the territory that they had when they gained independence from the Soviet Union, and that would kind of result in a Korea-like situation where a portion of the country would potentially be turned over to the Russians. Now, that's not an ideal situation, but the Donbas region in particular, which has at least originally had a large ethnic Russian majority in parts of it, that is a logical area. Now, the problem with that is that it would serve to encourage Putin to perhaps grab more land, and that is something that would have to be watched and also countered with a strong security guarantee for the Ukrainians. And in my mind, that should include NATO membership. Now, Trump has said that that is something that he will not support, and Biden before him was also lukewarm, to say the least, regarding that. But that would be the best security guarantee. But noteworthy is the fact that that Great Britain, the United Kingdom, has committed to a 100-year defense treaty with the Ukrainians. So there is at least some movement in an effort to provide the Ukrainians with security guarantees at this point. That's going to be essential going forward.
Okay, let's move to another world trouble spot, the Middle East. Now, there's been some kind of agreement between Israel and Hamas. I believe some Hamas prisoners and Israeli captives and American captives have already been released. Will you explain to our viewers and listeners what's going on there?
Yes, so far, no Americans have been released or remains repatriated at this point, but 3 Israelis and one, well, of those, one I think had dual British Israeli citizenship. But there are 3 Israeli hostages that were being held by Hamas, have been, all of them women, have been repatriated to Israel. In return, the Israelis provided the Hamas terrorist group with 90 Palestinian prisoners that were released from prisons in Israel where they were being held. There's always an imbalance in the numbers in these situations, but that is what's going on so far. So this is the first part of what is designed to be a 3-phase agreement that would result eventually in the withdrawal of Israeli forces, if it's carried out, withdrawal of Israeli forces from most parts of Gaza, with the exception of the corridor that is the border between Gaza and Egypt. That's called the Philadelphia corridor. And then the other part is that the Israelis were also going to maintain control of a central corridor that divides North and South Gaza. But the basic idea is that this is designed to be, by both the Biden and the Trump administrations, the first step in an effort to bring peace to Gaza and peace between Israel and the Gaza population. Israel, of course, wants to make sure that Hamas is destroyed. That is going to be really hard to achieve, but their leadership has certainly been decimated at this point.
Okay, let's, we've just got a brief time left. I'd like to ask one thing. Yesterday or morning or Sunday, I don't remember which, President Biden pardoned General Miley, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if I'm remembering correctly.
Right.
Why did he need to pardon General Wiley?
Well, General Milley was the chairman, the most recent past chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So in that capacity, he was the #1 military officer. General Milley made a phone call to the Chinese, his Chinese counterpart during January 6th, to assure the Chinese counterpart that we were not going to get into a situation where we were going to attack China, and also to assure him that we were, in essence, going to be stable in spite of what happened on January 6th. President Trump took great umbrage to that and vowed basically to make sure that General Milley, in essence, would be prosecuted. So that's why Biden pardoned Milley. Milley has never been charged with a crime, nor would he be charged with a crime. He was performing his duties as the top military officer of the country, and that is the basic background here. And of course, Trump had Milley's portrait removed from the Pentagon hallway in an unprecedented act of retribution.
That was kind of petty, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't understand anything Donald Trump does.
I think very few of us do, Brad, but that is
yeah.
That is one of those.
Let me okay. Let me ask you one more question. Oh, we're out of time. Unfortunately, we're out of time, which means we'll have to impose upon Colonel Layton to bring him back at some point. because I'm sure there'll be lots to talk about. In the next half hour, our guest is Hope Fry, who is the co-executive director of Project Lifeline, which assists immigrants. We'll be back with more Deadline DC after that. Besides talking in this half hour, we talked about national security, but in the second half hour, we're going to talk about executive orders that are going to lead to roundups of immigrants and unfortunately, detention camps. But we'll be back with Hope and talk about that more right after this messages. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad
The
Bannon.
Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest
You got
man
it.
I
You
know.
got it, Brad.
He's
Thanks
been a
so much.
professor
Yeah,
at two
thank
major
you very
universities. He's
much,
been a teacher for
Cedric.
over
That
40
was,
years.
great.
One day, he told me
Thanks
that he
for
was
coming
having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
What grows in the forest? Trees? Sure. Know what else grows in the forest? Our imagination, our sense of wonder, and our family bonds grow too. Because when we disconnect from this and connect with this, we reconnect with each other and build family memories we will carry with us forever. The forest is closer than you think. Find a forest near you and start exploring at discovertheforest.org. It's easy. Just put in your zip code to find family-friendly outdoor destinations near you. You'll also find guides to free activities, games, and amazing forest facts. Give the magic of the outdoors to your kids and reconnect with your family. Find a forest near you at discovertheforest.org. That's discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Into effect yesterday, two things. He closed the border already for people who were waiting, and he ended refugee resettlement. So those things went into effect immediately, which is why I put them at the top. But borders.
A lot of working class voters who live outside of blue voting areas are asking, where the hell is the Democratic Party? Sad to say, the party of the people is mired in Washington, controlled by a cadre of high-dollar consultants, corporate lobbyists, big donors, and meek political leaders who've decided that red and rural American voters are lost causes. But grassroots progressives who live in those areas say bovine excrement. After all, you damn sure can't win if you don't bother to show up. So, party inertia aside, progressive advocates for working-class values, policies, and people must become the ground-level organizers to build a little d Democratic majority, not by writing position papers, but by going there.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. In this half hour, we're going to talk about immigration. Our guest is Hope Fry, an internationally respected immigration attorney and co-executive director of Project Lifeline, which assists immigrants in trouble. Before, we're going to play a clip to lead us off about from Trump's inaugural yesterday, but let me say something. I for some reason, I get really upset about this issue. And in preparation for talking to Hope today, I tried to nail down why I'm upset. Well, the first thing is I am the descendant of great grandparents on both sides of my family who are immigrants. The Bannons and Ryans came over from Ireland, and the LeCounts and Precourts came here from Quebec. And that, don't get me started on Canada. That's a whole other thing. So, I like to think that between them, the Ryans and the Bannons and the Precounts and the LeCounts, they did a pretty good job contributing to the well-being of the United States of America. And I think in all the hostility towards immigrants, we're neglecting the contributions that immigrants have already made to this great country and the contributions they'll make in the future if we give them half a chance. Second, when we start talking about military roundups of immigrants, that to me is so typically un-American, I can't even wrap my head around it. And third, I think that, in the future, we have an aging population. We're going to need people to serve honorably in our armed force and pay Social Security taxes. And I think we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater here. But anyway, let's play this clip, Mark, of the president's statement on immigration yesterday, and then we'll get to our guest, Hope Fry.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came.
That, is just one of very many scary statements that Donald Trump has made about immigration. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Fry, an internationally respected immigration attorney and the co-executive director of Project Lifeline. Hope, what did you take out of the inaugural yesterday? Let's get started. Let's try starting that way.
Well, the inaugural address itself was just a regurgitation of the lies and promises that Trump made on the campaign trail. Then he issued in this very dramatic way for his supporters all these executive orders and proclamations. And basically, Brad, what we have to say about them, the contrarian said this, my good friend Austin Coker, who should be Kocher, who people should follow on Substack for his brilliant commentary. They said these orders are laughable. They will result in massive litigation. There are already 2 lawsuits filed yesterday. And they have no legal basis. They're full of lies, outright lies, as is his wand, and they attack the Constitution, which you can't do, and the legal basis they articulate is infirm. So I think, this border promise, first of all, you can't deport millions and millions of aliens. You've got to, if he was only going to deport criminal aliens, undocumented, pardon me, I'm using his words, undocumented immigrants. If he was only going to deport them, some number of them are already deportable. A law that's sitting on his desk would make incarcerations, permanent incarceration of people who have are charged with having committed very small crimes, shoplifting and other things, and possible deportation before there are even decisions on the merits of the criminal case. But what he did yesterday, he came out with his priorities, and one of his priorities is the death penalty for any undocumented immigrant who maims or kills an American. Now that's just, that's downright crazy stuff. he immediately ended something called CBP-1, which is an app that Customs and Border Protection created to make alleged order out of people who want to cross the border, including people who are eligible for entry into the U.S. under special programs that we have for Venezuelans, and some other groups where if they have a sponsor, they could enter the U.S. for 10 years. He immediately ended that program. But I want to say that people who have come in under that program already, and there were 500,000 admitted already, are part of a database. So when he ends parole, he's got 500,000 names and potential addresses and ways to find addresses through sponsors of people who he is now, who were here under color of law, whom he's just now made illegally in the United States. Similarly, he ended temporary protected status, which Biden had just extended. Those people are all part of the government database. There are many, many of those. I'm not sure how many, more than 500,000 from countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, and even Nepal. I think there are 5 or 6 countries that come under that ambit. So right away, he's got a lot of people whom he can identify out of databases where you don't need to go do these raids. One of the reasons, there are lots of reasons that he can't do what he says. One is cost. There's $1 billion more or less appropriated for ICE, and I can actually give you those numbers. I've made some notes because this stuff is all new. He'd have to have more money, considerably more money authorized, and he'd have to build more detention centers. Now, under the securing our borders executive orders, he said, well, we're going to continue the wall, and governors who want to do stuff in their infrastructure can, which immediately made Abbott's concertina wire in the river legal and took all of the litigation away from that. He is going to permanently incarcerate people whom he finds deportable until they're deported. Now, many people, I think, are going to be arrested who have the right to be here. They're permanent residents or citizens. They're identified through color or names or accents or the places they're working. Permanent detention, who does that benefit? 90% of people who are held by ICE are held in jails run by private contractors. The 2 biggest ones are the GEO Group and CoreCivic. And in 2022, GEO made $1.5 billion from ICE contracts, and CoreCivic made $552 million. Congress appropriated $2.9 billion. Sorry, I didn't have my notes for ICE detention. Now, if they're going to, that was for 30,000 some odd people per day for the year. He's going to theoretically, and he will, he's got the databases, he will get some number of people. So he's got to hold them, he's going to hold them indefinitely until they're deportable, until they're deported. Let me say that there is no time window when you have to be deported. So you can be found deportable and be held forever. He's going to, and I want to talk about the cartel business in a minute. My guess is, though, with CoreCivic, GEO, and the other organizations, that he's already made promises who's going to get those contracts, and they're already setting things up. And Biden was expanding ICE detention. So there are already places that we don't know about that are being prepared. And after this, Brad, I want to go to the cartel, because here we're talking about.
Okay, we're going to have to do that after this break. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Fry, an internationally respected immigration attorney and co-executive director of Project Lifeline. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC after this break. And by the way, for our radio listeners, if you want to watch us as well as listen to us, you can watch us at twitter.com/Brad Bannon, at facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, and at youtube.com @Deadline DC. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC and our guest Hope Fry right after this message.
There are a ton of social networking websites, but one stands apart for a very special reason.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Fry, who is an internationally respected immigration attorney and the co-executive director of Project Lifeline. We're talking immigration in this half hour, and it's part of our effort here at Deadline DC to bring you policy experts from different areas to talk about the impact of the draconian Trump policies on America. Hope, let me ask you a question here. I have to ask this. Why should Americans, I was born in this country, I don't think I'm in any danger of deported except for my political views, probably. But why should most Americans be concerned about what's about to happen with, detention centers, massive immigration, military forces in the cities, rooting out immigrants? Why should most Americans be concerned about this?
Trump is a dictator. He said he was going to be one, and he came right out of the box. These are totalitarian efforts, plain and simple. They're unconstitutional and they're illegal, and he thinks he can put them into play. I think we should be afraid because when we attack the least among us, the most vulnerable, we set the stage to attack everyone. He's a dictator, and he's already proved it.
Okay. Let's try this. I can't imagine, if there are mass roundups of immigrants, how this is going to end well. What are the dangers?
Well, there are a lot of dangers. First of all, I suppose we are going to divert attention from those things we need to be worried about: our infrastructure, our education, other things, our healthcare, that we really need to be worried about as Americans. And we're going to have streaming news of untruths and pictures of people being rounded up. Whenever a government or anyone can create chaos and fear, it's a good day for the totalitarians. I think that's why we need to be afraid. And those of us like you and I who are progressives need to do everything we can to speak out, to support progressive organizations, and those who are going to file massive numbers of lawsuits to try to contain these draconian and cruel policies.
Let me ask you one question. In the first half hour is Cedric Layton, who national security analyst for CNN, and we were talking about his talk yesterday about taking over the Panama Canal, and Cedric basically outlined a whole bunch of inaccuracies that the Chinese control the Panama Canal. They don't. That Americans are being treated unfairly in terms of fees for using the canal, and there were a couple others too. What kind of untruths are Trump talking about when he talks about immigrants? Oh, we got to welcome back radio. We'll be back right after this message. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Fry, who's an internationally respected immigration attorney and the co-executive director of Project Lifeline. Hope, before I rudely interrupted you because I wasn't paying attention to the clock, I asked you what kind of untruths and lies is Trump telling to justify these vicious attacks against immigrants? I mean, I remember from the campaign, Haitians in Ohio were eating dogs and cats, which turned out to be utterly untrue. What other kinds of lies is Trump telling?
The executive orders and proclamation are full of lies. I'll tell you, Brad, they're too numerous to enumerate, but let me just read from the executive order declaring the national emergency because it itself is full of lies. America's sovereignty is under attack. Our southern border is overrun by cartels, criminal gangs, known terrorists, human traffickers, smugglers, unvetted military-age males from foreign adversaries, and illicit narcotics that harm Americans, including America. The invasion has caused widespread chaos and suffering in our country over 4 years. Well, right there we have practically, well, everything there in that is a lie. And this statement has been used to justify everything that he's doing. I think, Brad, you asked me why we should be afraid. And I think one of the things that has been an underpinning of American society is the right to due process. And there were court cases, they are old, and they have been repeatedly upheld by the Supreme Court that say that people who are undocumented are entitled to due process of law. And one of the things that's happening is Trump is pulling the right to hearings and the right to be heard from undocumented immigrants. And one of the places that he's doing this that is really insidious is in the cartel declaration. So he said that cartels and other organizations that are designated as terrorists are an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security. And he's invoked the Aliens Enemies Act of 1798, which is wartime authority that allows the president to detain and deport natives and citizens of, quote, enemy nations. And he can target these people without a hearing based only on their country of birth or citizenship. All right, if you don't need any hearing, you round up a bunch of people that you say are part of terrorist organizations or in cartels, you hold them secretly and you deport them in the middle of the night. There is no transparency. Nobody even knows they were deported. We had people incarcerated in a similar way when there was a Muslim ban. People were arrested willy-nilly, irrespective of whether they had the right to be here. No hearings. And this is a way to target people whose political opinions he doesn't agree with, whose neighbors report them as being terrorists or part of a cartel. You know, police under these rules, police and other authorities, local authorities can get involved. So we start to look like Nazi Germany, where people reported on each other and then there was action taken. They were deported to death camps. They were incarcerated. They were killed. We have the beginning of that in this cartel. And people say, cartels, terrorist organizations, they're bad. We should be doing this. But that's not what this really is. It's super, super, super dangerous in my view. And we have had in the past, since I've been practicing immigration law, we've had people charged repeatedly as terrorists. A colleague of mine, Mark Vanderhout, in San Francisco, litigated one of these cases for years. And eventually, the men involved who were charged with being terrorists and ordered deported were found not to be terrorists. There, we had due process and a hearing, so we knew what happened. We're not going to have any idea what's going on. That, to me, is terrifying, and it should be to every American. It's the gateway to totalitarianism. It is
Okay,
the
let me, I have to ask you this question. One of the things that Trump talked about in his inaugural yesterday, well, I guess he has already issued an executive order that ends birthright citizenship. Can you explain to our viewers and listeners what birthright citizenship is and how do you eliminate something that specifically, president by executive order specifically eliminates something that's embedded in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution? And already, I believe, a dozen state attorney generals have filed suit saying that his executive order on birthright citizenship is unconstitutional, which it seems to me it is. Explain birthright citizenship and why it's important, Hope.
Birthright citizenship is pretty simple. It's enshrined in the 14th Amendment. It's been upheld against court challenges in a number of court challenges. It means, with a few exceptions, if you're born here, you're a citizen. And the biggest exception are diplomats who the 14th Amendment requires that you be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which almost everybody who's born here is, virtually everybody, but diplomats and certain government workers for foreign governments aren't. And I want to just say the first case was in 1898, the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, where under the Chinese Exclusion Act, a gentleman who was born in the United States was excluded. And the Supreme Court said you can't do that. He was subject to the jurisdiction when he was born and he was a citizen. So we've had that ruling since 1898. Now here's what he did. And it's complete chaos just on its face. At the time of the person's birth, if the mother is unlawfully here or is here on a temporary visa, and the father is not a United States citizen or a permanent resident, that child is not a U.S. citizen, and that child becomes stateless. Now, how is he going to do this? You can't just, assuming, it's unconstitutional. So there's the first barrier. But he says that any child born 30 days after a couple of agencies issue a guidance, which they already undoubtedly have prepared, is subject to this elimination of birthright citizenship. Okay, how is he going to do that? How's he going to find out? You're going to make an application. Where does it become important? It becomes important for all kinds of benefits. Lots of things are important. But one way you prove citizenship is by getting a passport. Now, all people have to be treated the same, equal protection of the laws. So are we now, everybody applying for a passport, going to have to prove that their mother was lawfully here or their father is a U.S. citizen? I couldn't do that. I don't have documents for my parents. Are children going to be asked in school to prove their mothers are here legally? I mean, this opens a Pandora's box of enormous proportion and will cause huge discrimination and massive problems for untold numbers of children.
Hope, we're running out of time, so I have to ask you this question. Trump has a friendly Supreme Court. Are they likely to go along with, well, first of all, the question of birthright citizenship, that it doesn't exist? Is the Supreme Court likely to go along with that?
I think it would be hard for them to, because the 14th Amendment is so clear. And in this hemisphere, under the guidance of the United States, most countries have a birthright citizenship. It's not true in the rest of the world. But it's hard to say what they'll do, Brad. It's packed with a bunch of Trump supporters. But I think that birthright citizenship will continue. I don't think he's going to get rid of that.
Okay, Hope, I'm going to have to interrupt you there because we've run out of time. I'm sure we're going to have to talk to you again because this is going to be a long, scary road, I fear. I want to thank both our guests today, Cedric Layton, CNN military analyst, and Hope Fry, co-executive director of Project Lifeline. We'll be back next week, so join the Trump resistance and watch the best in aggressive progressive talk. Mondays, Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'll be here if you will. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brad. It's